little gems of stories where nature has just bounced back on its own. And it's totally unrelated to whether it's an urban landscape or not. If you give nature space to do its thing, urban or rural, it'll pop back up and surprise you, and it does know best.
Welcome to the Green Urbanist podcast, where we explore climate action in cities with the people who are making it happen. Hosted by me, Ross O'Kelly, an urban designer and sustainability educator. Welcome to this episode and to a new series of episodes on urban rewilding. Over the next few weeks, I'll be releasing 6 interviews with practitioners involved in urban rewilding projects. This is part of a wider research project I'm conducting at the moment about how rewilding in urban areas can scale up to the mainstream, boost biodiversity, and offer benefits for urban residents. In each episode, you'll hear about real rewilding projects in English towns and cities, and learn about the complexities of delivering these pioneering projects. We'll tackle questions like, what is urban rewilding anyway, and why do it? Why do some rewilding projects succeed while others fail? And what systemic changes are needed to make rewilding in cities mainstream? I'll be releasing the episodes in this series in between regular episodes every 2 weeks, so keep an eye out for the word wild, all caps, at the start of the episode titles. Today's guest, who you might know from a previous interview in 2023, is Sean McCormack.
I'm Sean McCormack. I am a vet is my kind of profession and day job, and I do a lot of conservation and now rewilding projects in the urban borough of Ealing, where I live. The most kind of notable one, I suppose, is the Ealing Beaver Project, which I'm the project lead and license holder on. And we've reintroduced beavers to the urban London landscape for the first time in over 400 years.
We discussed the rewilding projects in Ealing, which is a neighbourhood in West London. He's led on the reintroduction of harvest mice and beavers to urban parks there. The release of beavers in the city has attracted national and international attention. The Mayor of London even came down to the site to release one of the beavers in October 2023. In this conversation, we get into all the details of making these projects happen and making them a success. If you want to understand more of the ecology side of the projects, definitely check out the previous 2 episodes with Sean, which I've linked in the episode description. Enjoy.
Rewilding, as a phrase, is kind of controversial at times now, and it rubs some people up the wrong way, and it gets other people really excited. And it's very different, I think, between kind of urban and rural landscapes. A lot of rural communities sometimes feel quite threatened by the term rewilding because some members within those communities feel that it's possibly displacing people from the land, or it's saying that people have damaged the land too much and we need to heal it and it's all your fault. So it has quite negative connotations, I think, especially in rural communities. But in urban communities, what we've found is that people are very, very excited by the term, and it has an ability, I suppose, to re-engage people who maybe aren't so engaged with nature and green space in the urban context. It also has the ability to engage people who were never engaged with urban nature and green space, and why that's valuable. Like, we've definitely seen that. The history of my group is Ealing Wildlife Group, one of the project partners in the Ealing Beaver Project. Is we started with very traditional conservation, species-focused conservation projects, and got the usual crowd in who are interested in nature. But when we started talking about rewilding and species reintroductions, like harvest mice first, Britain's smallest native rodent, and now Eurasian beavers, Britain's largest, the passion and the interest that it ignited has been fantastic. So, long-winded answer, I think urban rewilding is can be a lot of things. Urban is self-explanatory, I think, but rewilding, I would kind of define it as nature-led, nature recovery. It can sometimes involve reintroductions, but it doesn't always. That's obviously what grabs the headlines. But we've been partnering with the council as landowners on adopting a rewilding approach on a lot of their management, which often means stepping back from the management and allowing natural dynamic habitat change to happen over time, with a little bit of tweaking along the way.
That's great. I really like that. Nature-led, nature restoration. Do you think that definition is different to how other people are using the term urban rewilding? And does that create any issues? Or other people's interpretation of the word, I suppose?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many definitions, and I think there's a movement away from the term rewilding to nature recovery,
Mm,
nature restoration. Um, yeah, I don't put too much like credence into like the language. I think you can get caught up in terminology and definitions and be real, pedantic about definitions. And actually, we're all trying to move towards the same thing, which is restoring nature, allowing nature-led, ecosystems to develop,
yeah,
allow build more resilience back into the urban landscape by allowing nature to recover or putting nature at the front foot of decision making and things. So yeah, I'm not too concerned really with how other people define it, and we've definitely faced criticism on urban rewilding is a vanity project, and these animals shouldn't be put into an urban landscape, and there's always naysayers in everything you do. um, and whatever you call it, you're going to have varying opinions and sometimes quite strongly held views. We're just trying to make space for nature and try and enthuse urban communities about the value of nature. From a selfish perspective, for us to thrive in an urban landscape, we need nature. But also from a kind of biodiversity crisis and climate crisis aspect as well.
so you've been involved with several rewilding projects. Can you give us a little bit of an overview of what they are? And then I'd be interested to know a little bit about what started them, what kicked them off.
Yeah, yeah. Well, if I start maybe with what started it, because we kind of went down this kind of rewilding path that led to where we are now,
Mm,
from a very traditional, as I said, conservation approach, where our targets, our end goals or aims of each project was we want to boost the numbers of this specific species of bird or plant or animal, mammal, and that can be quite constrictive, and it can be quite I guess, narrow focused and definitely single focused, but it can be to the detriment of other things. And it can also lead to disappointment because, for example, we wanted to get barn owls breeding back in Ealing. We knew they were hunting on the outskirts and sometimes coming into some of our meadow environments to hunt, and we didn't think they were breeding. And, we focused everything on putting up nest boxes for barn owls and things, and you can be disappointed because you don't get the results that you're looking for, because maybe there's not enough feeding habitat for barn owls, or maybe there's too many large roads that are a hazard to barn owls. But actually, if we say, do you know what, we want to rewild some of our very highly managed wildflower meadows, and we want to allow some of those entire meadows to revert to rough grassland and scrub emergence over time by stepping off the mowing regime, or we want to allow messy margins to develop by not mowing the whole meadow, but just leaving, 10-meter strips either side of the hedgerow, then wonderful things happen. There's no set end point. It's just a management change, and it's allowing nature to take the lead, and then we monitor what happens. And actually what happens is a load of field voles arrive and boom in number, and then our barn owls can feed chicks, and we get a boom in kestrel numbers, and suddenly all of our boxes are occupied with owls. So it's this change in mindset that actually we don't need to micromanage everything towards this defined end goal. We actually can just go, we can have just nature for nature's sake here and see what happens. And then it often comes up with, really, really positive results that surprise us, or that actually, were better than our traditional conservation approach that we began with. So that's kind of where our rodent obsession in Ealing came from, because it did start with our barn owl project, and we suddenly had all of this lovely messy marginal habitat that would be seen in agricultural land as waste ground, and is often seen in urban parks as scruffiness and untidiness and laziness on the part of the council. But actually what it's providing is biomass of insect life and now small mammal life. And I am a self-confessed rodent nerd. I did my undergrad dissertation on rodent ecology and parasite burdens and things. So I've always been fascinated by the role of small mammals in general ecology. And I was looking at this habitat and going, this habitat is perfect for harvest mice. And I started looking into, do we have any records of harvest mice in Ealing? And the last known record of harvest mice in Ealing was 1981. at a reserve called Perryville Wood. And then I thought, do you know what, this could be a new project, an exciting project of trying to bring back a species and getting into the kind of rewilding narrative of, do you know what, we don't manage the place best, nature does. So that's where our road into rewilding and species reintroductions came from. We put back harvest mice after, 30, 40-year absence, we think. And we're seeing, amazing results, not only in terms of the number of eggs and chicks laid and hatched by owls and kestrels and things in our boxes, but also in the interest from the community within Ealing and London, but also like nationwide. We've got a lot of press and it's captured hearts and minds, and this is where, you get philosophical and maybe a bit romantic about it, but, people talk about urban rewilding people and showing people the power of nature, the value of nature, inspiring them to get outdoors, inspiring them to take an interest in, how we manage green space in the urban landscape. And that, kind of snowballed into, right, well, do we reintroduce water voles next? Britain's fastest declining mammal, also locally extinct. And then I kind of came up with the crazy idea that beavers should be first and water voles next, because beavers are the keystone species that create the habitat that water voles and lots of other wildlife thrives in. And otherwise we would be battling habitat management for water voles forevermore. But actually the beavers create the habitat for us, for water voles and everything else to thrive as keystone species. So long story short, I skipped up the rodent ladder from harvest mice to beavers, and we might come back down to do water voles in time. We'll see.
That's awesome. Thanks. What a great what a great story it is. Like, it's a great narrative of how this comes together.
That's the short version.
Yeah, I know. We spoke for 2 hours last time on the long version. I'm really interested in this project that I'm doing, this research project, of understanding how do projects like this, urban rewilding projects, actually happen and become successful, as opposed to the ones that stay ideas and don't go anywhere. And so looking at this as a very successful project, or series of projects actually within that, I'd be interested to know who has been involved in terms of making this happen. It sounds like there's probably a lot of players involved.
Yeah, there certainly has. No one can do a project of this scale on their own, even like a single organization. It doesn't happen overnight. It doesn't happen with one kind of team involved. You have to bring in various stakeholders, and I think in the urban environment sometimes that can be even more difficult, because you've got densely populated area and everyone likes to have an opinion and a voice, and you need to listen to those opinions and voices, and sometimes you need to win some stakeholders over, including members of the public. So the elevator pitch on this is that we are a collaborative project between 4 project partners. So it's Ealing Wildlife Group that I chair, Citizen Zoo, who are an organisation, a CIC, community interest company, that try and bring citizens, the public, into conservation and rewilding projects. Ealing Council, who are a local borough council that manage and own most of the green space in the borough, and Horsenden Farm, who are a kind of community farm collective near the beaver site that kind of have volunteer base and do a lot of conservation projects as well in collaboration with us. And then we're also supported by Beaver Trust, who are the national charity aimed at restoring beavers to regenerate landscapes, and then also supported by the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, who gave us some funding for this from his Rewild London Fund. So it's a big collaboration, but not only that, official collaborators. We also had to get buy-in from the public, the community that we were going to do this project in. We were going to disrupt some of their lives for a time by doing the project. There's also strong opinions about whether it's worthy, whether it's risky, whether beavers belong back in Greenford and Ealing, and then we had various funding streams to get. So we've approached local businesses, and we've approached sponsors and things like that. So there's been a lot of people, a lot of conversations, a lot of convincing to do, a lot of public consultation, and then getting the finances together and getting a working agreement and management plan and an army of amazingly dedicated volunteers that are really, really leading on it. It's a community-led project, which is very unique.
Amazing. Sounds really complex. And I guess a question I have, and this might be slightly tricky, is do you think there's been any, it sounds like you've had support from all levels, essentially. It kind of goes from the grassroots all the way up to the mayor. Everyone in between is has been providing support for this and sort of making it happen. Do you think there's been any like wider factors at play that means that we're all ready for this now? Do you think our mindsets have shifted? Do you think there's something in the politics or I don't know, some wider systemic change that means like it made it happen for you, if that makes sense?
Yeah, it does make sense. I think we are at a quite exciting stage. We're at quite a terrifying and depressing stage when it comes to our planet's health and the environment and climate and everything like that. But we're also at a stage where a lot of people are waking up to that fact and are no longer ignoring it and realizing the gravity of and how precarious a situation we're in. And therefore, it's a cliche that I think works really well to say, you can think global and act local. A lot of people talk about that, but it's powerful, and it's possibly the only thing that a lot of people can do is, what can I get stuck into, or what can I take an interest on my doorstep in my busy life? I might be like a little drop in the ocean in my daily habits, recycling or, taking the bike instead of the car, and all these little things that we're kind of guilt tripped by big corporations into doing to be a good citizen and to save the planet. But actually, when you give people an opportunity to come into something kind of new and exciting, and maybe a little bit more sexy than traditional conservation, putting up bat boxes or bird boxes, or talking about mowing regimes and meadows, and that kind of stuff can be seen as quite dull or stuffy. But when it's about releasing a charismatic mammal that's been extinct for 400 years, it's incredible how that inspires people to get involved or captures their imagination and enthuses them. So yeah, I think we're at a really exciting time where there is a systemic shift. And you know what? Politicians follow the masses, and they're looking for votes. And if people are telling them that we don't want a music festival trampling down our most precious meadows, where we just physically, as a family, release some harvest mice back into the wild, then politicians will go, oh shit, that's not a great proposal we've got, because the entire community is lashed out at our proposal and they value those meadows and mice. So there is a shift happening, and I think people also are realizing that they have power over politicians, and people are, you see the protests now, and you see people rallying and people being up in arms about things. So I think we're at an exciting time, and I think there is a change coming, and I think rewilding, the narrative of rewilding, is a good tool to drum up a bit of awareness, but also a bit of righteous anger that, like, we can't continue to trash the little fragments of nature we have left in the urban landscape. That every part, they're some of their parts. We can't just keep taking bits out and developing on bit after bit after bit of land, because then it all becomes fragmented and quite useless. So yeah, long way of saying, I think, yeah, we're in an exciting stage, and something is shifting in the public mindset, I think.
That's great. That is great. That's really great to hear. I think what's also interesting, and this isn't necessarily a question you have the answer to, or anyone has the answer to, but I see reports in the news of other places where they're attempting to do rewilding type projects, and they're having the opposite. They're having actually lots and lots of community backlash to that, and people who are responding really negatively to it. Do you think there's anything you did in your projects that mitigated like a very negative response that could have come about from it?
I think we'd been around quite a while, and I kind of proved the model and gained trust by delivering other successful projects, and we had a large backing of followers and members behind us, kind of championing what we do. And I'm talking not only about my group, Ealing Wildlife Group, but Citizen Zoo as well, have done some fantastic things. And I think the the commonality or the common kind of thread, and looking at the council and the parks, the ranger team from the council, how they, several of them within the team, had shifted from a sort of authoritarian and gatekeeping, like the management of our green spaces, to we want the community to lead on this, and we want to make volunteering happen, and we want community to feel ownership of the green spaces. And like with Ealing Wildlife Group and Citizen Zoo and Horsenden Farm, it was like, this is community led. You guys pay your taxes and own these spaces, so we want to hear your voice. We're not sitting behind closed doors having meetings and saying, this is how we're going to do this. We're actually asking the community, and we're giving them opportunity to come in and do it with us, and facilitating that collaborative role with the council, I think, was probably the secret to the success here. But also, not to, totally take the credit for that, I think the difference between the urban and rural divide is quite interesting, because 83% of people in England live in towns and cities. And most of them, actually, when you give them a little bit of exposure to nature, kind of realize that they've been lacking exposure to nature, or they've been lacking access to nature. And there's a, social justice issue there as well, of people from some of the poorer socioeconomic backgrounds and things, and ethnicity as well, having less access to nature than the traditional people involved in traditional conservation, which tends to be heavily biased towards white middle-class people of a certain age. So when you start to demonstrate that, actually, guys, our parks and our green spaces belong to us, come get stuck in, come and explore, come and discover, come be part of something, actually it's quite powerful. Whereas I think in rural communities and areas, it's very new to be going in and purchasing up land and rewilding it and taking it out of production, which has been hammered into us for centuries of, you must be tidy and productive and make this land work. So actually something that threatens that and says, let it go, lose control, actually can be very unsettling for rural communities that depend on the land and have been told all their lives and all their ancestors' lives that you need to be productive and tidy and manage this, and don't let it escape from you. Don't let nature take over, because that's a sign of failure in the systems that you've been living in and been reliant on for your income and your living. So it's just a very different audience, and I think the urban audience loves the fact that we're rewilding the city, whereas actually rewilding the country is a threat to a lot of other stakeholders.
Yeah, fascinating. It sounds like, based on that, at least in your circumstances, like a community-led grassroots approach was, I said, probably possibly what was needed in order for this to be successful. I'm separately speaking with one of the local authorities, Enfield Council. I was thinking, wait, Ealing, Enfield, get them mixed up.
Yeah.
No, not Ealing. Speaking to Enfield Council, who is doing a much more council-led series of rewilding projects, but are also being really successful and seem to have a lot of support from the community. So I'm excited to talk to them and see, it's the other side of London. It's a different, maybe different demographic, different group of people. And they'll probably have different lessons from those projects.
Absolutely. And, we get compared to them a lot because they were the first beaver reintroduction in London. We kind of differentiate ourselves by saying we're the first urban London beaver restoration project, because their site is brilliant, but it is out in the countryside on the periphery of London and the Essex border, and it's a rural country estate, and it's not publicly accessible, and it's a totally different thing. So with different challenges and different aspects and things like that. So, but yeah, it is really interesting. I actually had some members of that project out at our project yesterday, showing them around, and we were doing a little piece for the Ealing Council magazine. So yeah, it's very interesting to hear like the slight difference. What two projects that sound very similar. Well, you're both in London, you're both with beavers. Actually, we're worlds apart in terms of the challenges and even the aims of the project. Being publicly accessible and in a really, really urban landscape.
Great. I wanted to ask you as well about your. I hate to focus on the negatives, but I am really interested in like how other projects can learn from this and overcome the barriers and challenges they might face. Did you hit any barriers, challenges, roadblocks that all
Oh, yeah.
maybe almost halted the project? And what did you do to overcome those?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this project now, I'm joking this week that I've been running on 100 miles an hour for 2 years on beavers, 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 beavers. And I'm finally getting a holiday. I'm heading away this weekend and I'm like, out of office. I'm switching off. Nobody get in touch with me. I need a break. There's definitely been challenges to overcome. We've probably been really ruminating on this project for 4 years, and we've been kind of gathering info and support for 3 years, and then we've been battling with Natural England for a year, and then we've had the beavers for a year. So really, it's been very time consuming, and there's been lots of hurdles along the way. The main highlights or the main hurdles. One was one surprising one that wasn't that difficult to get over actually was asking the council for permission to do it, because the site we chose was already earmarked for engineering works to alleviate flooding, urban flooding, and we said, do you know what, beavers can do that at a fraction of the cost, probably more effectively in the long run. We were also quite lucky that the head of parks, Chris Welch, was Canadian, and we asked him, and he said, okay. He was all aboard the beaver train already as a Canadian. He was like, yeah, beavers are cool. Yeah, that sounds good. So that was a hurdle we thought we were going to have to jump, but it was a little skip over. So we got the permission fairly easily. The next stage was public consultation. So we had to have buy-in from the community. Like if we went and just did this without asking local people, I know we would have had a hell of a lot of problems and a hell of a lot of backlash and potentially even, physical damage to our assets and maybe even sabotage of the project. Because even with all of the comms we did and all of the public consultation and the official survey to get people's views, we still to this day have people saying, oh, the community weren't consulted enough and we didn't have a say, and who allowed this to happen without consulting us? And it's like, we just physically can't get to everyone and get everyone's opinion. And some of the opinions we got are negative and anti, but the overwhelming majority of the opinions we got were in support, with a proviso that they were worried about the beavers' welfare, and we had to reassure people on that the beavers would do everything beavers do to keep themselves safe from danger, whether that's humans or dogs or whatever. The biggest hurdle we had was legally and politically. Beavers are a political issue in Britain because we have different legislation depending on which country you're in. So in Scotland, they have been reintroducing beavers in enclosure trials for some time, and now they're issuing wild release licenses. And, beavers were granted native protected species across Britain in 2022, but still we're in a ludicrous position in England where the only legal way to reintroduce beavers to an area is behind a very expensive fence in an enclosure license, which tends to be issued in kind of 5-year license trial, and that's a very costly and time-consuming way of running a project like this, which is kind of, it was put to me the week the beavers were arriving, and I was at ultimate high stress levels, and I was speaking to Chris Jones, who runs the Cornwall Beaver Project, one of the founding members of Beaver Trust, and I said, oh Chris, I'm bloody stressed, like I don't know if we're going to be ready in time. And he's put it very succinctly and said, Sean, you're just releasing some rodents into a marsh. It's not that big a deal. Which was brilliant to hear. And I thought, yeah, we are just releasing rodents into a marsh. Why is there so much bureaucracy around this? It's not that big a deal. They're native species that we eliminated. They have an inherent right to be back. So we need to put whatever management frameworks, whatever incentivization schemes, whatever compensation schemes that the country needs and politicians need and stakeholders and landowners affected by beavers need, we need to just do it. The beavers are already out there, already in the wild. There's 2,000 or 3,000 beavers living wild, free lives in England. So actually continuing to put them into enclosure trials is just lunacy, really. So we're waiting on wild release license to come. But yeah, that legal and political uncertainty and hesitancy of government at that time to do anything about it was probably the worst thing. So we had to apply to Natural England for a license. And because we were, there's two unique aspects to our Ealing Beaver Project. One is the urban nature. It is it is beside a retail park and the Grand Union Canal and an industrial estate, and lovely green space of Horseland Hill and up to Harrow, where the beavers could head off into the landscape or swim to Birmingham in the Grand Union Canal. There's all these challenges that wouldn't exist on a private country estate where you've got two neighbouring farmers that you need to kind of get permission or support from. We had to get permission from thousands of people, really. And Natural England, to their credit, they do want beavers back, but they're under, orders from the government. And at that time, Therese Coffey was in, and she was anti species reintroductions, and she said we need to look after the animals and the wildlife that we already have, not dally in these silly reintroduction projects. And we were banging our heads saying beavers will look after and boost biodiversity very well, better than we can, better than we're doing now with 1 in 6 species threatened with extinction in the UK. So we basically were battling with Natural England along the way to try and convince them that A, this is a good idea, B, we could do it, C, we thought of everything, we would guarantee that if a beaver escaped, we had permission to get it back from surrounding landowners. That was a hurdle where, they told us very late on in the process, oh, now you need to get permission from landowners to go trap a beaver if they ever escaped. And we said, well, how many landowners? And they said, just where you think a beaver might end up if it got out. And so we were like, there's hundreds of businesses and properties around here. Like, how do we do this? So we sort of reverse engineered it, and we wrote a blanket letter to, I think 60 or 70 different local businesses and landowners around us, and just said, we are reintroducing beavers. And if one escapes, we will be coming on your property to trap it. And if you have a problem with that, let us know. And none of them had a problem with it, or none of them got back to us anyway. So we said, yeah, we've got permission. Like, we haven't received anyone objecting to that happening. So here we go. So there was like a year basically of going back and forth, and the goalposts moving, the deadlines for decision moving. And eventually we just had to say, look, you told us we would have an answer in September. Then you changed the goalposts and asked us to do more work, and you told us December. If we run past February, we can't do the clearance of the fence line because it's bird nesting season, and we'll be delayed by a whole year. So just make the decision, please, in January and tell us, have we got the license or not? If we don't have it, we'll move on. If we have it, we need to get cracking. So eventually they gave us the license. So that was the biggest hurdle, is getting the permission to do it. And then all of the physical stuff was just logistical challenge and sometimes budgetary challenge, and often dealing with the public, because the public don't like change in their open spaces, and putting in a fence, which admittedly does look like a fairly, robust prison when it first goes in to a cleared fence line, and it's these metal fences with, overhang. And someone wrote on the gate, nature shouldn't be confined in a concentration camp. And I was like, I do agree with you. I would prefer not to be putting up these fences, but that's the legal situation we're in at the moment. And honestly, next year, it'll be softened and greened and you won't even know the fence is there. So I totally take on board. It looks horrifically ugly right now, but it's for the beavers' welfare. And if we prove the model here with beavers in this enclosure, concentration camp like or other, it will advance the cause for beaver restoration in London and beyond. So yeah, there was teething problems, there was hurdles along the way. We had to close the site for a month to let the beavers settle in, and people didn't like being locked out, so there was gate damage and there was fence damage and locks smashed off a gate and people jumping over anyway and coming through. But in the grand scheme of things, with the collaborative nature and large support from the community, it went without a hitch.
Yeah.
Some weeks I wouldn't have said that, but in hindsight I can say that now.
Amazing. That's really insightful. I mean, particularly the legislation and all the bureaucracy part of it, I think is probably not the first thing that people think about when they start dreaming up ideas for urban rewilding, but that is the reality of it. Do you have any sense that might be softening or changing, or is it just as strict as it was when?
No, we're very hopeful right now. So I'm an ambassador for Beaver Trust, and talk to their team quite a lot. And there's some good sounds coming from government with discussions with Beaver Trust that wild release licenses are something that this government is going to have to tackle. And as part of that, the advice from Beaver Trust is that we need a management framework in place, and we need a species restoration plan that's joined up and bigger picture rather than just little higgledy-piggledy projects here, there and everywhere. So Labour's just passed its first 100 days in government, and they said they wanted to overturn some things or get things moving that the Tory government weren't moving on. So I think there's signs of change coming, and I think that at the moment, if I was thinking about a beaver reintroduction project, I would be holding I'd be holding tight and not applying for a enclosure license, because I hope that there's wild release licensing coming down the tracks.
Okay, well, that's great to hear.
Yeah, fingers crossed.
Do you think, did you have similar problems with the harvest mice reintroduction? Was that easier?
That was much easier because they're not a species that requires a license to translocate or reintroduce. But we just followed the Natural England guidelines on translocation and relocation or reintroduction of species. Again, we had buy-in already from the council because it was literally an extension almost of our barn owl and meadow rewilding kind of project to actually put back in a little missing link in the food web that was eliminated by our habitat management. So there wasn't a lot of resistance to that. It was funny, there wasn't a lot of resistance within our community, but when we got press on it, it was interesting to see like Sky News or BBC News or something putting it on their Facebook channels, and then the comments came through from people who had no context and were like, oh, that's all Ealing needs, more mice on the streets. And it's like, we're not putting them into like the row of chip shops and chicken shops down on Ealing Broadway, and they live in the wildest habitats in our borough, and they don't come into people's houses, and they're, a part of the food chain for like, grassland birds of prey. And, there's just kind of always a bit of, I don't use the word ignorant in a derogatory way. It's just, but ignorance is in, I don't really know much about this, and I'm just going to assume the worst, or, why are you spending money putting rodents into the ecosystem? There'll be a plague of rodents, and it's just a misunderstanding about how, ecology works and why this mouse is a rare species. But overwhelmingly, it was positive, and actually, it was a real eye opener on my journey in rewilding, even if it's just the narrative of rewilding versus traditional conservation, because we crowdfunded to kick off. We did a Kickstarter for the Harvest Mouse project, and we said, sponsor your own harvest mouse, Ealing harvest mouse, for £10. So we had like, a family of 5. Here's 50 quid for our mice. I'll take 2. Here's 20 quid. And we said, if you sponsor your own harvest mouse, you'll be invited to the first harvest mouse release, and you get to release your harvest mouse. And that people just threw us like $2,500 in 48 hours.
Wow.
Because they were like, I want to sponsor my harvest mouse. I want to do something that actually has an impact in bringing back a species to our local landscape that's been gone for a long time. So it was just a roaring success of like giving people that kind of feel good factor of like actually making a tangible difference with, it's only a mouse, but it's quite symbolic and it's extremely cute, which helps. Because if we were saying we want to, sponsor your own rare Conatus striatus spider, it would not have had the same impact, and the same enthusiasm from the public. So choosing an umbrella species that you focus your efforts towards and you focus community engagement towards, but actually the habitat that we've created or allowed to develop for harvest mice actually has allowed a lot more biodiversity than harvest mice to thrive again. Yeah,
that's awesome. I went to NEP during the summer, which was great.
Oh yeah,
and I got an ecology walk around with an ecologist, and they've released storks. Yeah,
white
storks, absolutely amazing, gorgeous. Animals. They look prehistoric and just so different to anything you see in Britain. And he was telling us about it, and they are a historic species that went extinct, and it's it's the right thing to do to bring them back, and they had to translocate them over from Poland. And he said to be honest, ecologically they're not like particularly important for the site. he said, but they're just such an iconic species and they're so obvious. And you can just come to Nep and you just see them immediately. You don't have to go searching for them. He said they've become such an important emotion emblem, exactly, an emotional connection for people to see that sort of wildlife coming back.
Yeah, and you know what? It was perfect timing with that project, because it kind of kicked off fairly under the radar for the public, and then they had their first wild hatched chicks in nests in trees as COVID lockdown lifted.
Oh, yeah.
And everyone was getting out again, and they were absolutely inundated with visitors to come and see these white storks. And again, as I say, it was this like emblematic, inspirational story of this very iconic and obvious species that was back in Britain once again and breeding in the wild. Real feel-good factor at a time when the country really, really needed some feel-good stories. So it was amazing timing. But it's interesting to also say there's a lot of hardcore birding people and very traditional conservationist types who, I won't say too much bad about them, but there's a culture of kind of gatekeeping nature conservation in that sector. And there's a lot of them still to this day contesting the fact of whether white storks are native to Britain.
Oh, wow.
There's only a few kind of records and references to them in the literature going back hundreds of years. I think 600-700 years ago, they say they went extinct. There's a couple of place names like Storrington in West Sussex that they say is derived from storks. But there's still people to this day saying that's a vanity project. That's not something you should be spending conservation money on. That's not a bird that we have any evidence of its presence here. We would have had more because it's a big conspicuous bird and it builds these large nests on buildings and things. And, still there's that kind of mindset that if someone dares to dream and, rewild and almost like maybe a jealousy of like capturing the public's imagination with a story or a narrative that may not be 100% true, then you're cheating. And it's like, whatever the viewpoint on this, there is some evidence it's a native species, but whatever your thoughts on pure botanical conservation or whether it's a good use of resource, if it's capturing the public's imagination and a sector of the public's imagination who would never be interested before in why nature is important, then I think that's money well spent.
Yeah, and I think as well, and also is not causing any issues ecologically within the space.
Yeah, it's coming into a niche that exists there for it, and it doesn't seem to have a detrimental effect. And I'm not saying we just put in animals into ecosystems without evidence they were there before. And there can be some issues with human altered ecosystems now not being capable of certain reintroductions. For example, wolves, the really controversial one. Can we have wolves back in Britain? Technically, yes. Should they be here? Absolutely. Is it going to be really difficult and there's going to be lots of conflict with having wolves back in Britain as it stands today? Yeah. That's a hell of a big problem to solve. Yeah. And I don't know if it'll ever be solved. So I'm not advocating putting things in willy-nilly just because it captures the public attention. But there's sort of a begrudgery and a, bashing of rewilding projects from some of the more traditional conservation brigade that kind of maybe has an element of sour grapes that it's getting a lot of attention right now.
That's it. That's interesting. I actually didn't know that about the storks. That's really, really interesting to know. Thank you. I have two more main questions, and I know you need to shoot off fairly soon, but we'll sort of get into these. I'll try not to take up too much of your afternoon.
No, you're grand. That's a hint for me to stop waffling.
No, not at all. Have any other, specifically urban rewilding projects, influenced what you're doing in Ealing?
My career, has kind of like taken me near to beaver projects and rewilding projects throughout my career. And one of the earliest kind of light bulb moments for me was I did an international semester in Vancouver, Canada, back in 2003. And there's a place in just outside downtown Vancouver, Stanley Park, with a place called Beaver Lake. And at the time, the beavers had departed Beaver Lake, but there was signs of them coming back into the city. And it was all this excitement about beavers are coming back and we're going to have beavers in Beaver Lake and Stanley Park again. And I was like, hang on. I just associate beavers with like the wilds of Alaska and Russia and the fur trapping trade. And like, these are animals that live out in, the wilderness. But you're saying they're going to live in a massive international city. It's like, we've just pushed nature out to the edges of everywhere, but actually we were immersed in it once upon a time. So that was the first kind of thing where I was like, urban rewilding. Now this was passive rewilding, and it was like an animal reclaiming its territory and colonizing urban space. So that was the first kind of inspiration on the kind of beaver journey that I was like, we should have beavers back, everywhere really in Britain. And then the other things that have kind of inspired me to, advocate for urban rewilding and urban beavers in particular is the wild beavers that are living in Britain anyway and are rocking up to towns and cities. This summer we had beavers arrive in Canterbury, in Kent, and everyone going down in the evenings to watch them from the back of the Sainsbury's car park overlooking the river. And we have a beaver lodge in Frome in Somerset, which you go and look at from the deliveries bay from Asda car park. So it seems they like supermarkets for some reason. So there's like little gems of stories where nature has just bounced back on its own, and it's totally unrelated to whether it's an urban landscape or not. If you give nature space to do its thing, urban or rural, it'll pop back up and surprise you, and it does know best, So there's been various things. I think the Plymouth project, to give them their due, Plymouth Beaver Project was the first urban beaver project in Britain, where they were reintroducing them on the outskirts of Plymouth. There's a lot of talk about rewilding being on a vast scale, and if it's not over, 250 acres, it's not a rewilding site, and there's all this kind of stuffiness sometimes in the rewilding space as well, and kind of gatekeeping that, and it's only rewilding if it's at scale. No, it's not. You can rewild your lawn, you can rewild your local park, you can adapt a rewilding approach to something. We didn't even use the word rewilding on our Ealing Beaver Project. We said we're reintroducing beavers to urban London. And people were like, some people were critical and saying, this isn't rewilding. And we're like, we didn't say what. Why are you getting hung up on the terminology? Like, we're putting a species back in that's going to improve the habitats and restore nature and biodiversity on that site, and has beneficial effects for our community and us as people, because it will mitigate for urban flooding downstream. And it's worked. So, people get caught up on that. And I just see all these urban projects and urban communities getting back to nature and fighting for nature. All of them are quite inspirational to me,
How important was making connections with people like in Plymouth or other projects, or maybe internationally, to learn from them to influence your project?
Yeah, quite important. Some of the projects we got in touch with directly, some of them we just got kind of the top tips or the learnings from through Beaver Trust, who were supporting us in the journey and helping us with our feasibility study and our application. There was a million things going on at once, like it's quite a complex thing to deliver. So I had visited various beaver projects and beaver people in Britain, and just tried to absorb as much of their wisdom as possible, because our project was quite a high stakes project. It could fail in many directions in terms of public support, in terms of letting people into a beaver enclosure, in an urban setting where there's going to be thousands of people coming through that site every year. Will someone let a beaver out? Will someone try and harm a beaver? Will dogs be a problem? We tried to basically take as much information in on all of the projects that came before us and learn from them. And also Natural England, I think, had put some stipulations in place to try and head off some of those issues that other projects had. So yeah, it was definitely a case of like, let's not make the same mistakes other people may have, and let's learn from them, and let's try and keep pushing the beaver agenda forward.
It sounds like Beaver Trust are like a key, nexus for all of that.
Absolutely. I mean, I can't sing their praises highly enough. They're a great gang, great team. It's an absolute privilege to be an ambassador for them. And we just literally could not have done this project or even kind of dreamed of the project without their advice and help. They also, they caught the beavers for us from an area of conflict in Scotland where the options were for those beavers to either be constantly disturbed and moved on, or lethally controlled, which is a nice euphemism for being shot. So, they are absolutely vital in their work. And at the moment, when we're trying to restore this species across the landscape, every beaver counts because, they're relatively low in number on a national scale. And genetics matters now as well because of Brexit. It's a bit more difficult to import beavers. So we're relying on the beaver population that we have currently as the founder population for future beaver restoration in Britain. So as many beavers as can be saved and translocated, even though it's 2 enclosure projects right now, it's still really important actually to maintain the genetic diversity within the population. Yeah. So beaver trusts are absolutely amazing doing that work.
Awesome. Have to give them credit. That's good.
Yeah, absolutely.
Final question, Sean, and this is the one that I'm super interested to get your take on and your perspective, which is, if we think beyond your project and individual projects, and I suppose we think about urban rewilding as a wider movement, what would you like to see happening with urban rewilding in the coming years? And I suppose another way of saying is, what would be like your version of success?
I think we're at the beginning of this change that I talked about earlier, which is that politicians are realizing, and politicians, influence top down, like local councils and land management, and how communities see and engage with our urban spaces. I think the sign of success would be that we have a kind of mindset change across communities, like even with people who are not that interested in these topics, that our green and blue spaces in urban environments are not just for us. They're also directly for wildlife and nature, and indirectly allowing space for nature will affect us in a positive way. So I think people often wonder, like, why are you doing that? The mouse example. Why are you reintroducing mice? What difference does that make in the grand scheme of things? It's maybe just reintroducing some mice to a meadow, but it's actually reinstating some processes that we've lost, that we don't even know the impact of. And I think we're at a time when people are now starting to realize that the more little bits of the puzzle we start pulling out, is like a big Jenga game where you're, slowly extracting, consuming, damaging. The whole pile is going to fall down. And it might be as simple as putting back a mouse into our meadow environments, or not being crazy neat and tidy brigade in all of our municipal parks, and allowing, a third of the grass to grow long, instead of mowing it with petrol lawnmowers and machinery on a 2-weekly cycle. Or it might be as simple as, putting in other features, natural features to thrive, like ponds and planting trees and things like that. I think the direction of travel is quite promising, and I think the sign of success will be when people are largely celebrating the return of nature to our urban communities, rather than seeing it as the old, historical, colonial and controlling way of seeing nature as, if we've stepped off the gas, literally, and allowed nature to grow and bloom and blossom, then we're very untidy and it's neglect and we're not doing the job we're meant to do. I think we're seeing the kind of like deconstruction of that Victorian mindset and that colonial mindset that we need to conquer nature and we need to drain the land and we need to keep it neat and tidy up to every edge. So that's the thing I would like to see, is that a proportion of park space in every borough across the nation has long grass and scrub emergence and good habitat for harvest mice.
That's great. That is great. I love that. A worthy goal, to say the least.
Harvest mice, you see, are the gateway drug to nature. So.
Once you've held one,
there's no going back. Pay £10 for the experience and release them into the wild, and use our motto, which is make good choices as we let them go into the wild, then you're hooked. I tell you, they are the gateway drug to nature.
That is awesome. How far do you think we are from that?
I think we're there. I think we're getting there. I think we're quite lucky in Ealing that we have a fairly progressive and green and biodiversity-minded council. We have had struggles. We've certainly gone up against the council leadership and councillors on certain decisions that would have been very harmful or destructive to nature and indeed directly to some of our projects. But we kind of have an agreement, where it's kind of like this kind of big brother relationship in some ways, saying we want to work with you, but we don't think you should do that, and we will go up against you if you do, and but we will sing your praises too when things are there. So I think councils are and politicians are getting on to the fact that this matters, and we can't continue to just consume and take and divide and fragment and build at all costs. It has to come into standard practice that nature is given space at the table as well. Otherwise, we're all in big trouble. So I think we're already in it, and I see the direction of travel is quite positive. There's still some bureaucracy and mindset shift in the way that needs to change, but I'm quite optimistic these days.